Good. Welcome to the panel on investing in personalized medicine. I'm very, very fortunate to be able to moderate this panel. My name is Tom Miller of Greybird Ventures. I will not go through an elaborate introduction of my colleagues because Noel, Miro, and Justin, and eventually Nicole will be able to introduce themselves. I've asked them to do a quick introduction first and tell us a little bit about their organization and what their focus is, and then we'll launch into questions. So we'll start at the end, to my right, your left. Noel?
Hi, I'm Noel. I'm with a firm called Illumina Ventures. We are a firm that's spun out of the corporation Illumina that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. In 2016, we have a $230 million fund that we're investing out of, and we are very focused on precision medicine, but across multiple spaces, including diagnostics, therapeutics, and life science tools. I think one trend that we've seen is that there's a lot of life science tools companies that also have diagnostic applications, and then diagnostic companies that also have therapeutic applications. So everyone's kind of coming together in this precision medicine field, and we're really excited to learn about new companies, and I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up as well.
Good. We'll take right off Miro.
So good afternoon everyone, Miro Venturi, I'm from Roche Diagnostics. Roche Diagnostics is an IVD player, a global IVD player. I'm based at the headquarters in Basel. I'm part of the divisional business development organization of Roche. Reason why we are here is we want to contribute to redefining early stage investment. Typically, actually, we would not be coming to this type of events, so we are particularly curious to learn more about how to even engage a little bit earlier with companies and support, particularly in a moment of time where a lot of funding not necessarily goes to in vitro diagnostics, and that actually makes us very worried about the future of our platforms and the assets that we are commercializing worldwide. So I'm very happy to be here. I don't know how much funding I can contribute. We are more of a 12 billion company. Typically we do things like Flatiron, which we don't typically meet here, again, as I said. But I think, investment and support does not only mean funding to me, it can mean many other things that I think a global corporation can offer to early stage companies as well.
Justin.
Yes, hi, I'm Justin. I work for Hemi Ventures. We are a Bay Area-based early stage investment fund, 50 million check size, 50 million fund size. We focus on a lot of frontier and disruptive technologies and agnostic in terms of the type of companies we invest, and with a stronger focus on any data and platform, data and AI-driven platforms. And so quite different from the rest of the panel. We're very early stage, and we focus more on the team and the technologies. And happy to join the panel today.
And I'm your moderator, Tom Miller, from Greybird Ventures. Greybird is located here. We are also an early stage investor. We have been told that we are the world's largest dedicated investor in diagnostics. We are also the world's smallest dedicated investor focused on diagnostics. And you'll learn more about us as the panel goes on. One thing during, of course, we have this phone call beforehand to coordinate ourselves. And one thing that came up during the phone call was the thought that it might be useful to give our impression about the state of personalized medicine and investments in personalized medicine, et cetera. And I think Miro, you were the one that brought that up. So why don't you start off and tell us what your feeling is? What was the feeling of Roche in personalized diagnostics, the investments, et cetera? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we think it's a very important field, an interface between pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. A lot has to be sponsored, a lot has to be supported. We were having also conversations about what would be the areas in the future that would be more likely to experience this type of funding. And we were having a bit provocative thoughts about, maybe it's not oncology anymore, because oncology, one would say, a lot is being done already in oncology. If you think about comprehensive genomics profiling, if you think about all the beautiful technologies that can be applied for cancer patients, our view is a little bit more, let's be bold and try to be actually in personalized medicine in other areas, in cardiovascular, personalized medicine for psychiatrist disorders, where we have no clue, no real idea about how the biology looks like, and however patients need the diagnostics, we need to be able to anticipate which type of disease is occurring at the level of the brain, and also match it, of course, with the best treatment possible. So I think we were looking at things like, being provocative. Forget about oncology, let's move into new areas where we have a great need of diagnostics and pharmaceuticals combined, for which people that are actually developing innovation out there, way more than large corporations, might have appropriate solutions for it.
So why don't we start with the view from the big guys? So Noel, do you agree with that?
So I'd say yes, in general, I definitely agree with that. And quite honestly, as a VC, we look at companies like Roche Diagnostics as leaders in telling us what they're looking for, right? Because we want an exit. And so he's saying, oh, we do like the Flatiron type of investment, but that's a multi-billion-dollar exit that we'd love to have from one of our portfolio companies, right? So we definitely like to see what really the market leaders like Roche Diagnostics are doing. I'd say that there's a small nuance I'd like to add to the conversation, though. So I'd say that surprisingly, there's still the number of early stage startups in precision medicine are still quite oncology focused, even though we are also looking for things outside of oncology, especially for diagnostics. For example, we have the last few months we've spent looking at a lot of infectious disease diagnostics companies, and if you think about precision medicine, it can be applied across the board, across therapeutic areas. But I'd say that it's interesting to see that there's still a lot more oncology-focused diagnostic companies that come into pitch, for example, even though we're also spreading our horizon a little bit further. And to be fair, we also have a lot more experience with oncology than other therapeutic areas, just by the nature of the game and the investments that have gone in. But it's interesting. I do think that there are some, at least from the investor side, I see a lot more investors looking outside of the space of oncology to look to invest. And these days, I'd say, while there's still a lot of money invested in oncology, the differentiation has to be a little bit more than what it was a few years ago. That's what we've seen. It's no longer I have this one biomarker type of thing. It's I have this well-validated assay looking at lots of different things we can stratify at many different levels. I think that's the way that precision medicine and diagnostics has shifted that I've seen so far.
Where's your money going?
I think, just a joke, if Roche is looking at other disease areas, we might as well jump into that. We're basically seller side at this early stage. But I think we, from our point of view, generally when we go into companies, they'll be very early stage. There's limited data we can show. So the way we de-risk ourselves is looking at platforms that can be flexible in the future. That being said, let's say there's so much data floating right now, and every day there's more data being generated. How do we discover new tools, new methods to look into it, and how do we solve the data siloing problems? These platforms are generally what gets us excited, and I think regardless of what the current trend is, there's always a business model for them in the future.
So I'm going to give a bit of a contrarian view, but first of all, a view about the field in general. If you're in this field, you already know it's really hard. It's hard to raise money. You need a lot of it in order to conduct clinical trials, because by definition, you're looking at something with high specificity, meaning you have to survey a large number of patients to find the small cohort for which your test works. So it just makes the math very difficult. It is true that we are inundated by oncology-based companies coming to us, so I agree with the big guys at the end of the table. That said, oncology, and here I'm going to offend everyone that works in this field, oncology is easy compared to things like mental illness and mental disorders. Because, let's face it, oncologists have the great benefit they can do a biopsy. You have schizophrenia, you have depression, you have things like this. What's your baseline? How the hell do you find it? I mean, it's getting to something that's both personalized and precise is really, really hard. And the last thing I will say about the field is, and I'll say it, trying to get you to have empathy for a venture capitalist, which I think none of you should have. But when we raised our fund only some years ago with the idea that we would be a precision medicine diagnostics fund. I can tell you, if you go out and try to raise money with those words, we got 238 no's. I mean, ultimately, we were able to raise a fund, but it was only through a long, hard slog. So if you're in this field and you're raising money, be prepared to get a lot of no's. But you'll get a yes eventually. But it's a hard field to do. And I totally agree, Miro, I totally agree with you. But you just caused by this shift, I use mental illness as one hard one. Let's take cardiovascular disorders. Cardiovascular disorders is the other end of the spectrum. Lots of disease, but there's so many things that are prognostic indicators. There are so many things that you need a 40,000 patient trial in order to get something that's new and differentiated. Oh crap, you need a lot of money again. So the reason I think oncology is a big one is, for once, cancer is the easy place, but it's a difficult one. Let's move to something different. Each of you guys looks at companies. Mira, you may look at big ones. Noel and Justin, you may look at smaller ones. But ultimately, everyone sitting in this audience, or most people sitting in this audience, I bet, we'll take a show of hands. How many of you are here trying to raise some money? Raise your hands. That's what I thought. So the real reason they're sitting here is they want to know how to extract money from our pockets. And so what I'd like to do is ask you a very simple question. 2 parts. What is it you look for in order to say, yeah, this is a company I want to invest in? And more importantly, what are your turnoffs? This is going to sound like a dating game, right? What are the things which, if an investor comes to you and says these things, you're going to say, no way, they don't get my money? I'm going to start. Justin, you're not prepared. I'm going to start with you.
Okay, yeah. So early stage, yeah. I think for the most companies we get in touch at this stage, we have limited data to access to look at. So what we focus on is team, technologies, and let's start with actually vision first. We value vision, but there's important steps we get to the big visions. In the sense of early stage, it's typically for us we want to see a 1 to 2 year executable strategized plan. What are the milestones we want to achieve? What are the risks we want to tackle? And how we go about doing that? How much money is this going to cost? And we need to be very crystal clear on these things. And I would say, so for this, a turning off point is company coming in, giving us a big vision without a executable plan. We also value the team very much. Oftentimes, some companies will come in saying, "We have this idea. We're thinking about doing it. I'm right now spending half of time on it." This will also be a turning off point for us. We like to see a fully committed time and the team. And 2% is always better than 1. 3% is always better than 2. They're always more. The bigger the team it is, the more they can do. And I think typically these are the points, the things we look at.
So if someone comes into you and says, I'm a full-time professor at University X, but I'm part-time spinning out this company, and my colleague here is an assistant professor, and we're going to do this part-time, but we have plenty of time we're going to devote to it. That's a no for you. Don't even talk to them.
I would still like to talk, but I would say, why don't you talk to your students, your postdocs, see if anyone of them is interested in operationally fully commit to this company, and making sure you allocate enough share for them, and we can talk to that team.
Great. So I'm going to go to the other end of the table. Noel, what does it for you?
I could start with the nose, which is quite easy. First thing is valuation, which you would think is not an issue because it's hard to raise money as a diagnostics company, but especially on the West Coast, surprisingly, there's a large number of diagnostics companies that are able to raise maybe like a seed round with a super high cap from some tech investors. I mean, it's great for the company until you get to that next fundraising cycle, and then there's no way we can invest because it's just not worth our money to, if you're at a $20 million valuation, you don't have much, you're going to need another 50 to get reimbursed. It's hard for us to imagine putting in $5 million for 20% of the pot at that stage, and knowing how much we would want to inflate the valuation at the next round as well. So valuation is the number one thing. And then there's another thing that gets us to an easy no, which is how differentiated is your platform. So there are some companies that come by and say, hey, we have a new 5-gene signature for disease X. Great. So what are other people doing? They have a 4-gene signature or they have a 7-gene signature. It's not, but ours is better. That's really not a great answer to that question for us. And if it's something that's really special and you have great data, how hard is it to protect when you have a 5-gene signature and somebody else can say, we just switched out these 2 genes and now it's a differentiated, assay. That happens quite often, and I think that's a quick no for us because it's too easy. You're blazing a path for fast followers to come in and take your market share. Or maybe there's 500 different competitors that are trying to do some similar things, maybe with slightly different biomarkers. So that's another key no. I'd say those are the 2 quick things that we look for no. Now to get to a yes, we have a few requirements. The first thing is team. In the diagnostic space specifically, much more than even early stage therapeutics or life science tools, we think that experience is absolutely invaluable. Diagnostics it's a hard industry. The healthcare system, the reimbursement system is much trickier than kind of the clean-cut therapeutics pathway. There's things you have to do with the FDA for therapeutics, but it's harder because you have to go through different entities. You have to go through FDA, you have to go through CMS, and then you have to get hospitals on board. There's a lot of different things for diagnostics. So we look at the team and make sure that there's at least somebody who's been there, done that. And I think that's quite important to have at least one person who knows the field. That helps us get to a yes. The other thing is, do you have something that's quite broad? Do you have a platform that can be applied? If you're a cardiovascular diagnostics platform, can it be applied to multiple kind of subsets of the disease? I think that's more interesting to us than having one thing. But that's not a key thing. I'd say the key thing is, I agree with Justin, you have to have a well-laid plan. You know exactly what you're going to do and what milestones you're going to hit along a 2-year path. For us, that 2-year path typically means post-clinical utility. So what data you need, how many patients you need, how much it's going to cost per patient to get to what specificity, what sensitivity, what diagnostic yield, so that you can get that reimbursement. Because if you don't have a clean path to that and you're kind of like hand-wavy about, I don't know how big this trial is going to be, that's really bad news for us, and we can't get to a yes unless you have that defined. And I can tell you we've gone very close to a yes several times with diagnostics companies, even in this past year, and then when it comes to that, they don't have a well-laid plan, and that got us to a no at the end of the day. So I guess in the end, there's a lot of reasons to say no, but if you hit several things that all get us to a yes, including team, differentiated platform, and a well-laid out plan, I think that's key. The brownie points are for the people who come in knowing how their next fundraising round is going to go. So if you come in with a plan saying, today we're 5 on 15, next round we have this clear inflection point where we're going to raise at a 30 million pre-money valuation. And by the way, we're going to be able to do that because we have a Roche Diagnostics as a partner, for example, or one of the companies that we looked at had Medtronic as a partner to help pay for some of the clinical utility studies. I think that's key, and that's definitely helps us get to a yes.
So Mira, before I ask you the same question, I want to tweak a little bit. How many in here who are looking for money already have a valuation above 400 million? Raise your hand. Okay, so we're going to look at partnerships for you, since none of them are ready for you to buy yet. So tell us, what's it take to partner with Roche?
Yeah, I mean it's it's not easy probably, but I think you know, on an initial level, I think what we like are data. We like a lot to look at data. In general, as an organization, we are not particularly fond of just pitches. Maybe because we are coming from Switzerland, so in Switzerland everything is very solid. Yeah, I don't know how many of you have been to Switzerland. Yeah, so I'm Italian originally, and of course in Italy not a lot of things are very solid. But you know, when I moved to Switzerland, I was conquered by the way that the Swiss actually build buildings. They're very concrete, very large, very stable. You know, they never move. And around the place where I live in Basel, you know, one of the typical age of the houses is 1200, you know, from 1300. They're still just completely, they are enough, you know, there are people living there, it's amazing. So anyway, just, you know, that was actually to say, I think we like to look at things that are data supported, so we like it a lot. Even when it's about really pitching a new technology, the more one can speak about data and show some initial data, it's very encouraging actually. We like passion. We like passionate people behind the technology, behind the company. I would say that probably also what kind of switches me off more or less immediately is when you have this great technology and you know, it's all animal studies and it stops there. You know, I think we need to start. We need to get really excited in the in vitro diagnostics field when we start seeing patients' data, when we have at least a cohort of 50 patients. Maybe in addition another validation in an independent data set of another 20, 25 patients. That gets actually us more real, more interested. I also have an observation just in general for all of you more involved in the early space in IVD. Typically what we don't like, or what I don't like, is what the company says comes and that's this spectacular technology and then they say, we are going, and I know it's a challenge by the way, but it's not something that I typically like. And they say, we're going to actually develop the technology and that's actually going to, we're going to bridge it into a CLIA lab setting, and then we are going to do pharma services over the next couple of years, and then later on, by the way, we have also our path to diagnostics product. I think companion diagnostics are disappearing. They don't exist in a couple of years. Companion diagnostics is a very old concept. Companion diagnostics is finding the patients for your treatment, if you think about that. It's not finding the treatment for the patients. So it's not personalizing medicine and precision medicine. Is confining your own way and desire to test the patients so that later on you can administer the drug. And if it is a fresh drug, I can speak about myself then it's even better. So the future of healthcare is not going to be companion diagnostics. So although we can use companion diagnostics and pharma services as a mean of enriching the way we develop the diagnostics, ultimately it's a deviation. It's a way we are digressing focus, because in a smaller company, if you start doing pharma services and you set up a CLIA lab, you actually divert resources from the fundamental need on developing the diagnostics problem. And if your company is small, you actually run the risk that you dilute yourself so much that at the end of the day, you're neither interested for diagnostics nor for pharma. So, and I know I said a lot of things a bit provocative, but it's really something that, from a precision medicine point of view, we have to really think about thoroughly what the future of precision medicine is going to be in 5 years from now, and the extent and the role that companion diagnostics, even from the pharma side, are going to stay important, particularly in the constellation of one test versus one drug.
Mira, I'm actually glad you said your last statement, because I actually share this view, and I'm saying that not to flatter you so that you'll buy one of our portfolio companies later, but because I actually believe it to be true. I think that's the case. But let me try to answer my own question, the same for me. And I'll do it the same way, first turnoffs. If in the first 3 minutes you can't summarize the clinical problem you're solving, go away. You need to be able to know that. It has to be crisp, has to be important, and you have to have a plan to get there. That's an easy one. In addition, I also find that there is, not only do you need a good plan, A, you need some good plan B as well, because there are things that which may not go well. I mean, let's face it, especially because we are early stage investors, we know that the plan that you first present to us will probably not be the plan that you ultimately execute. And I like to say, when you show me a business plan, the only thing I'm sure about with respect to the business plan you show me is that it's wrong. Something's going to go awry, something's going to go in the wrong way. So just like Justin, I really care a lot about the team. And one of the things I care a lot about is the attributes of the CEO. So not only, like Noel, do I like someone who's been around the diagnostics block for a while, but a great CEO needs to have what I like to refer to as professional schizophrenia. And professional schizophrenia means that they have the ability to impart to a group an incredibly compelling vision. A vision that will cause you to say, I want to invest here. I want their product. It's lovely. And at the same time that this compelling vision is able to be promulgated to an audience, in the back of that CEO's mind is every way this company can crash. Every possible risk that could come up and bite them in the behind and cause their whole plan to go downhill. And know what they have to do to de-risk that. Because let's face it, a lot of it is de-risking all of the different points along the path to success and knowing what those are and having really well-defined plans on how to de-risk those things. And I think that's a critical part of what the CEO has to look like. And if it's a team, I want to see that it's not a bunch of like-minded people, that there are people who have different attributes that actually help one another come to a well-rounded view. That said, it's a really tough area to invest, but I'm going to ask a question that we did not discuss during the planning call, so get ready. And that is, if you had a sort of a dream investment, you know, a company that would just come to you out of the blue that has this, that would cause you to say, oh, we're going to put money there. What would the dream investment be? Miro, I think you already have an answer, so go ahead. The others can think about their answer while you answer. Go.
I think I would dream about having a blood-based test for early detection of Alzheimer. And of course, you know, if I can allow myself to even continue to dream, maybe also the associated drug. I think that would be a major, major one. And I think even just the test per se in blood, being able to start discriminating patients from MCI versus Alzheimer, that will open the way for a number of lifestyle and potentially also small therapeutic interventions for patients that will, you know, it's a huge opportunity from a diagnosis point of view, and it's an immense opportunity if you think about that also from a therapeutic perspective. So if you have anything in blood, then, you know, you can also just show me animal data for that actually. I would be happy anyway.
Justin, your dream company. They may be out there.
I don't have the exact vision, but I would really value a early stage cancer diagnostic company that has high sensitivity, specificity, as well as on the business side, really figuring out how this is going to create new markets. I think currently there are lots. It's a space that's being very crowded and lots of competition. Everyone's still trying to make it happen, and we just haven't seen it yet. So I would really like to see this sector being transcended.
Your fantasy.
My fantasy. I briefly mentioned that we were looking at a lot of these, but I really think that some new diagnostics in the infectious disease space would make a huge difference. A lot of patients still die in hospitals due to sepsis. Actually, a lot of hospital deaths are because of sepsis. A lot of people die from hospital-acquired pneumonia. People shouldn't be dying from those things. On top of that, we have this antibiotic resistance problem that's is occurring constantly, and it's so hard to develop antibiotics that drug companies are giving that up. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that we don't have rapid multimodal detection systems in place for infectious disease. And if we are able to do that, for example, if you have like an Illumina, the next-gen sequencing assay, but somehow you have a platform that can turn that test around in an hour or two, maybe even up to 3 hours, I don't know, but if you have a way to rapidly detect different pathogens, know what the antibiotic resistance genes are, et cetera. I just think there's too many people dying for no reason from some bug that's not covered under the standard antibiotics that are given, or covered under the standard PCR panels. And I think that would be kind of a miraculous thing that would save hundreds of thousands of lives in the US alone every year. And that's something that we're looking for, and we're hoping to find it.
So it's interesting. So Graybird has spent time outlining what we call grand challenges in diagnostics, and 3 of them were already just outlined here. We have them outlined actually in fairly specific detail, so I'll just dovetail on the comments of Noel. We're also looking for a infectious disease or sepsis company. We actually have the following criteria, and you've mentioned most of them. So the following criteria are under 1 hour, under $50, able to determine bacterial, fungal, or viral, able to do that, of course, without culture, because as I said, under 1 hour, but also able to give, for any of those things, the resistance profile. You hit all of those, man, you got yourself a company, right? I mean, so that's hard. I mean, with respect to the early diagnosis of cancer, I mean, we have a company that's trying to do that. It's really, really hard. We are up to now 5,000 samples and a 1,000 prospective trial, because if you're going to do that, let's face it, it's the law of large numbers. You have to test a ton of people to get a handful of cancers and make sure you're not missing them. And then you have to also test for everything that you think will possibly screw up that test. So if it's going to be a cancer of a specific organ, you have to look at people who have cancers of different organs, people who have other diseases in that same organ, people who have different, age, sex, history of environmental causes, etc. It's tough stuff. But the one that wasn't mentioned is one of the ones that we've almost crossed off our grand challenges list, so I'll add it to it. And that is the entire field of mental illness. So the reason we've almost crossed it off our list is we've ended up investing in a company that actually looks to create diagnostics around profiling mental illness rather than diagnosing it, because even if you have something that you say, I can now diagnose schizophrenia, how do you test it? What's the clinical trial look like? I mean, it's a bunch of clinical observations that are very, very difficult to nail down. So it's an incredibly hard one. And so those are an interesting set. We have an interesting set of problems we are still looking for answers for. But it's interesting, my 3 colleagues already checked off 3 of our 8 challenges. I would now like to pause a moment, because the most fun usually happens with answering your questions. So I'd like to ask for questions. Sir.
So let's follow up on what you were just talking about. That mental health has been mentioned a couple of times. Okay, schizophrenia is one thing. To me, big risk out there is that with Alzheimer's, at what point have you lost mental competency? And the lawyers are going to have a field day with this one, because it's in a lot of trust documents and all sorts of things like that. But at what point? I've spent some time with a group that actually has some diagnostic measurements, and it can be somewhat objective. I think that we're going to have an objective standard for this, because And I think it can be done. There's also some interesting stuff going on with AI that can start to identify when people are starting to lose it. Someone was telling me they interviewed Reagan in the first term and in the second term, and they noticed a change in his language patterns, which is one of the signs of Alzheimer's. So let me ask it now, frame it as a question. What are you guys seeing as this problem that's looming out there that you could have lots of litigation over when are people competent? And then what are you seeing in terms of kind of some sort of objective standard that could be a diagnostic that could address it in somewhere? Now, do you have things like that? Is that of interest to you?
Let me give a quick response, but this one I definitely want to turn over to the other guys. Because legal issues, holy crap. There's a company here, actually, that I met with who's trying to detect signatures from language. There's a number of companies trying to do that in order to make a diagnosis. This company was interesting, and it's probably because of your introductory comments. They actually took well-known people who had Alzheimer's later, because those well-known people often have on record speeches, and they've analyzed them. And they could tell with time their speech changed. They changed in context, they changed in tone, they changed in all sorts of ways, etc. Now the difficulty with those things is that it's probably necessary but not sufficient to come to a diagnosis. I'm going to skip the whole legal issue because, man, am I not competent to do that. But, the difficulty with any neurodegenerative disorders and with brain problems in general is the symptoms may have more to do with where the disease process is happening in the brain than what the disease process is. So when Miro says his fantasy is, I want a blood test for Alzheimer's, he didn't say, I want a blood test for neurodegenerative disease in general. He wants a blood test for Alzheimer's, because he needs a blood test for Alzheimer's for Roche's pharmaceutical arm to develop a drug that cures the damn thing. So the difficulty with his phenotypical measures is they often are exactly not precise. They are generic measures of a degradative process. But that's all I'm going to say about that. What are your thoughts? Diagnostics in order to tell your loved one, hey, I'm going to take your keys to the car because you can't find your way home?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a very, very interesting question. I think, the more specific you can be on the diagnosis, the better it's going to be. Because the diseases are so complex that by nature, I think you need actually to look at some biological fluid where you can look at something like some entity, something that is coming off the brain or where the blood-brain barrier is clearly damaged or start to be damaged that you can detect in the circulation. In association with that, one could think about predisposition in the same way. But even, if you were to do genetic testing for predisposition, assuming some variants would validate actually to anticipate the disease occurring, that probably even opens up even more questions from a legal side, right? How you do it, and how valid is that one? How can you use those data? How would insurances actually look at those data? So I think you raise a very, very important point. I don't have an answer. You put me to thinking about what are some of the consequences of being even more sophisticated about diagnosis for those disorders.
Other thoughts?
So I'd say that I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think today's deep learning algorithms, for example, are going to solve that issue. I can give a quick example. When you have a training algorithm on radiology images and you come up with diagnoses, a lot of times these algorithms coalesce and notice features that a pathologist might not or a radiologist might not. but the algorithm does, and they are different. And one of the studies I think published in Nature Science, right, it was shown that the deep learning algorithm did pick out differences, and the difference was that 2 different MRI machines were used for the imaging of certain markers. And so you'll never know that if you're a physician, but the machine will somehow pick that up. And I feel like it might be very similar for speech patterns, for example, because everyone has such different speech patterns. In other diagnostics, we've seen that where if you have different cohorts at different patient populations across the US, and you don't standardize your algorithm to be all-encompassing, and you kind of normalize your algorithm for each patient cohort, if you try to run a prospective trial now, it's a complete mess, and you have no diagnostic value whatsoever. That happens all the time with blood markers and gene expression profiles and whatnot, all these different things that people are measuring. So I can imagine it being even harder for natural language processing and looking for that. I think where we are for the detection of diseases like Alzheimer's is really just prognostic value and some predictive ability there. We've seen a company that looks in the blood for some specific markers. I can't reveal what they are, but they look for some specific markers, and they've looked specifically at retrospective samples where patients, by the way, if you're going to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it's post-mortem after they go in and quantify the amount of plaque and the types of proteins that are in your brain. You don't get a positive diagnosis until after you die for Alzheimer's. So this company went in, made a collaboration with the hospital, only got blood samples from the patients that were eventually diagnosed with Alzheimer's post-mortem, and then they came up with a signature that they said this is predictive. Now, we had a hard time with that because it's fantastic initial data, but imagine what that trial is going to look like to prove clinical utility, right? And that was a very hard decision for us because it's a huge problem. We agree that you need something, but how do you pay for that? And there was no partner willing to pay for some of those costs. And for a VC, because I mean, it's a huge field, but such a high risk, it was not worth it.
Maybe we should share.
Maybe we should talk afterwards, and I
share.
can tell you about this, yeah. So these are some of the challenges that we're dealing with, but I think can be solved today. Those types of diagnostic tests can occur today. I think stratifying cognitive impairment is going to be a tough one, and I think it might be the next generation of diagnostics, but not this generation.
Justin?
So when you met, first of all, Jean-René Bélanger, I'm CEO of Imeka. We do imaging biomarkers for neurodegenerative diseases. So when you said blood sample for Alzheimer's, my first thought was because we need to have access in, poorer parts or third world countries or something like that. That was my first reflex. Now you mentioned he wants a blood biomarker for Alzheimer's because he wants Roche Pharma to develop this drug. Why? My question is, so that challenged my first thought, right? So why a blood biomarker?
Blood biomarker because it's easy to access. It's easy to access. It's easy to diagnose. You can use it worldwide. You don't have the expensive procedure in the clinic to sample CSF. You don't have an invasive procedure, and simply because the complexity is there, because it's going to be super difficult to have one blood biomarker detecting such a complex disorders. And then, of course, the therapeutics also comes afterwards. But for me, actually, primarily comes from the diagnostic perspective.
I'll give a slightly different answer. So I used to run, at past one of the largest imaging businesses on the planet, and imaging would be great. The difficulty is more exactly what Noel brought up. The clinical trial is just excruciatingly difficult. It's just really, really hard. And I think that people would love it if there was a definitive imaging test that says you have Alzheimer's, you don't have Alzheimer's, you have Parkinson's or some other thing, or mild cognitive impairment of some other origin. Running that trial is hard, full stop. I mean, I'll give a different example, and back to the question of neurological disorders. I don't know how we got there. we actually took 2 steps backwards. We invested in a company which looks at simply trying to make more quantitative and objective something that is now qualitative and subjective, and that is neuromotion disorders. So Parkinson's, MS, Duchenne's, things like this. So we have a company, we put $4 million in or so, and they have a device, sits in the living room. It can identify you by how you move. So first of all, for multiple people in the room, you don't have to wear anything, you don't have to have anything. It just, you do, like you do with your thumbprint thing, you do a minute worth of wandering around in front of it. It says, I know who you are. It measures your motion, stride length, gait, sit to stand, all of these things. And then we've already detected in 2 clinical trials whether people are responding or non-responding to motion disorder drugs. By the way, quick punchline, it detected, one of the first beta testers for this device was my mother. It detected she had a stroke and notified me within 2 minutes. So it's pretty cool. But these are things which basically make precision medicine from what it normally is a clinically subjective diagnosis. And I think we almost need a suite of those upon which we can then get to Muro's gold standard of saying, now we have a chemical, now we have something that's real hard. But this is a difficult area. How are we on time? So I got one more question.
Hi, Mike Miller, I'm with Proterex Bio. We're in the chronic disease space, and I was wondering whether you could comment about the role of personalized diagnostics for chronic disease management and population health.
So Noel, what are your thoughts there? That's the good thing about being a moderator. I just go answer this question.
Let's see.
By the way, Justin, you can help Noel anytime.
One thing that especially for things like chronic diseases, I'd imagine it's extra important is whenever we say precision medicine, I know we focus a lot on diagnostics here, but it's coupled with something else. Otherwise, who cares? And it's got to be even more important with something like a chronic disease, right? Where you have some ability to test and then reflex to a different behavior change or a different treatment, etc. I mean, maybe that applies across the board, and for a lot of things they do, for example, cancer, it's quite simple, right? You have a specific mutation, you get a different drug. I think there's been a few companies that we've seen that are trying to address issues within, for example, the diabetic population, and they say, hey, you're more likely to, have XYZ complication in the future without a hard complement from a lifestyle or drug or some sort of change to definitively associate with the diagnostic. And I think that's one challenge we've seen that we hope that companies today are going to try to address and think through as they offer diagnostics.
I would just add, I think the role of personalized medicine is actually to determine whether a chronic disease category is actually a single chronic disease. Remember the whole history, right? 100 years ago, if you showed up and you were weak and anemic and fainted off and you had a disease of the blood. 80 years ago, you had leukemia or lymphoma. 60 years ago, there was 1 of 5 diseases. Now there's close to 100. One of our companies just won a competition from the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's, where they just sent blind samples, Parkinson's or no Parkinson's. We thought we would lose the competition because we came up with 3 categories. Turns out we got the non-Parkinson's 100% right, but the Parkinson's we had segregated into 2 categories. Seems like there's 2 of them. And maybe there's more. So the real question to me about chronic disease management is there a single standard of care? Or is there a decision tree of standard of care? And to me, that is one of the essence of personalized or precision medicine. With that, I think we're out of time. And I thank my co-panelists. They were fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here.